Astro Bot is pure joy and dopamine in video game form. It's a game that puts gameplay above all else and will have you grinning from ear to ear from start to finish. And unfortunately, it's also the kind of video game that is becoming increasingly rare these days. I had an absolute blast playing through Astro's latest adventure, and when I rolled credits and put the controller down, there was one thought that I couldn't get out of my head. We desperately need more video games like this. So today I want to talk about what exactly it is that makes Astro Bot so special, but then I also want to go beyond that and talk about why this game is also incredibly important to the future of gaming as a whole. It might sound hyperbolic, but I think that Astro Bot is actually a critically important game and something that the gaming industry needs to learn from. I have a lot to say about this one, so let's get into it. To truly illustrate why Astro Bot is so important, let's start by talking about what makes this game so fantastic in the first place. To put it simply, Astro Bot might be, in my eyes at least, the greatest 3D platformer ever made. And while this might sound absurd at first, when you stop to think about it, we aren't getting too many great 3D platformers these days. Nintendo has seemed to have a stranglehold on the genre forever, and while games like Super Mario Galaxy and Super Mario Odyssey are all-time greats, once you get past the Mario heavy hitters, it's hard to find many other games in the genre that are universally praised. Smaller studios have explored the genre quite a bit in recent years, and while personally I've enjoyed 3D platformers like A Hat in Time and Demon Turf, those games always feel like they're missing something to me, and they always feel like they're a significant step behind Nintendo's biggest 3D platformers. Astro Bot is the first non-Mario 3D platformer that I've ever played where I sat back and thought, yeah, they have this figured out. Whatever the secret juice is that Nintendo injects into Mario's 3D adventures, well, Team Asobi found a way to get their hands on it. And while I think that juice is for the most part indescribable and just something that you know when you see it, I'm going to do my best to break it down. And the first ingredient is the undeniable, overwhelming charm that Astro Bot is absolutely bursting with. Not to overdo the Mario comparisons, but Astro Bot is clearly on some Super Mario Odyssey type shit when it comes to charm. Each planet in the game is bursting with life and color and is absolutely begging to have every nook and cranny explored. The variety on display here is also impressive, as Astro's adventure has them exploring tons of different biomes and theme levels, all which ensure that environments never feel stale. The star of the show here though, when it comes to charm, are the bots themselves. There are 300 different bots scattered across the game's dozens of planets to rescue, and I gotta say that these guys are easily the best collectibles I've ever seen in the genre. Rescuing these little dudes is far more gratifying than chasing down coins or stars, especially when you see the adorable ways in which they interact with one another. Finding the various theme bots is even more rewarding, as Team Asobi left no stone unturned when creating the Easter eggs for this game. While many of these bots are based after games that everyone knows, some are references to long-forgotten corners of PlayStation's history, and even a PlayStation veteran like myself found many of the references going over my head. The best part about these bots though is once you rescue them, they go back to the game's central hub area, and there you can partake in various different activities with them. Some of the actions that you can perform with them are oozing with charm and feel straight out of a Disney Pixar movie at times. Seriously, all of it is adorable, and I honestly think I could spend hours upon hours just wandering around the crash site, hanging out with all the bots that I've rescued. The game's soundtrack is equally impressive. Almost every song is a joyful, upbeat bop with the potential to get stuck in your head for hours. I found myself humming the main theme in particular long after I put the controller down. So Astro Bot gets an A+ in the charm factor. But the other crucial component of that secret Nintendo juice that I spoke about is gameplay. And I think Astro Bot might get even higher marks in this category. This game feels incredible to play. And while a big part of that is due to the responsiveness and crispness in which Astro himself controls, I think the even more impressive aspect is the DualSense support on display here. I remember playing the pack-in title Astro's Playroom when I first got my PS5, and thinking that the DualSense was truly the future of gaming. The various different haptics on display and sensations that Team Asobi was able to convey with that controller had me believing that gaming was never going to be the same now that we had the DualSense. Fast forward 4 years though, and the controller now largely feels like an afterthought most of the time. Developers either don't know how to use it properly or don't care to, and most major releases these days fail to utilize the controller in any meaningful way. Team Asobi, however, once again proves with Astro Bot that they are masters of the technology because the DualSense utilization in this game, much like in the former title, feels revolutionary. Whether it's the pitter-patter of Astro's feet running on the ground or the gentle falling of rain, everything that happens around Astro is felt by your hands thanks to the PS5's incredible controller. It's a level of immersion that I haven't felt since Astro's Playroom, and it again has me ready to buy as much stock in the DualSense controller as I possibly can. The primary goal of Astro Bot is finding various pieces of your spaceship, which is a giant PS5, and then repairing and reassembling those parts. There's a mini game you play after recovering each one, which has you controlling giant robot arms and using a variety of power tools to clean, fix, and then reassemble the broken PS5. On paper, this sounds like one of the most boring mini games ever conceived. However, the haptic feedback on display here feels so damn good that I couldn't get enough of it. Whether I was using a hammer to nail a piece into place, or a pressure cleaner to remove paint from the PS5's plastic, each tool felt distinct and satisfying to control. This boring sounding minigame became one of my favorite parts of the game after a few goes, thanks to the DualSense utilization. The DualSense is also beautifully implemented in another one of the game's strengths, Astro's various power-ups. Many of the levels in Astro Bot see Astro acquiring various different powers that grant a mechanic that are needed to progress through that level. Some are fairly simple in nature, a jetpack that propels Astro upwards or a gun that can be used to shoot enemies, and some are much more creative. For example, giant frog arms that allow Astro to punch enemies from afar, or one that turns Astro into a sponge, allowing him to soak up and then shoot out water. Some are more satisfying than others to be sure, but all of them feel great to control, and most feature more creative usage of the DualSense. My favorite has to be the mouse one that allows Astro to shrink and then enlarge again at the press of a button, completely changing the world around him as he does. The technology on display here blew my mind the first time I saw it, and I think it stands up as one of the most impressive things I've seen in this generation of gaming thus far. I wish the camera control just a bit snappier, but outside of that one very minor complaint, the gameplay on display here is nothing short of perfect in my eyes. I've seen some people say that Astro Bot feels like Super Mario Galaxy 3 in many ways, and I think they're onto something. This is without a doubt one of the greatest 3D platformers ever made. And that brings me to the second part of this conversation. Not only is Astro Bot a great game, but it's also an incredibly important one. While video games are more popular than ever these days, it's no secret that in many ways the gaming industry is standing on tumultuous ground in more ways than one. Games take more time and money than ever to create these days, and when one project is taking 5+ years and hundreds of millions of dollars to create, it puts immense pressure on studios to ensure that every title they create is a commercial success. And when a game that requires so many resources doesn't become a hit, well, that means it's a disaster. I'm sure a lot of you can guess where I'm going with this, but nowhere is this point more evident than with Sony's other marquee release of 2024, Concord. I won't go into all the details because I'm sure anybody watching gaming videos on YouTube is familiar with the infamy of this situation already, but Concord will probably go down as the greatest flop in gaming history. Reportedly, the game cost over $400 million to make and spent around 8 years in development. All of this to launch to unprecedented levels of apathy and then have its servers shut down after only 2 weeks. It's truly a wild story and easily the most extreme example of the point I'm trying to make, but this sort of development cycle is not good for gaming as a whole. Clearly, Concord had plenty of other issues that led to its demise. It was an unimaginative $40 live service game, chasing a trend from almost a decade ago. But the point remains that any game with an 8-year, $400 million development cycle is going to be under immense pressure to succeed. And that is why we need more games like Astro Bot. As video games have continued to grow and become more mainstream, they've also become bigger and more expensive productions. Sony, in particular, is especially guilty of this. As the PlayStation brand has continued to expand, Sony has moved further and further away from its early, smaller, and more whimsical titles and more into huge, blockbuster prestige games. Gone are the days of Spyro the Dragon and Sly Cooper, instead replaced with the massive AAA adventures of Kratos and Atreus, or Joel and Ellie. I'm not outright saying this is a bad thing. It's good that video games have evolved as a medium so substantially over the years, but this rapid shift is also partly why Astro Bot is already so beloved. It feels like a true love letter to those earlier days of gaming. Limited story, limited cutscenes, an abundance of charm, and just damn fun gameplay to keep you hooked for hours. We need more of this. Not only is this a formula that gamers love, but this has to be something that developers want too. Obviously, making any video game is hard, but creating a tight 15-hour platforming experience like Astro Bot has to be a significantly less intimidating experience than signing up to help develop something like Concord, a live service title that will need to be played by millions for years and years in order to be profitable, and a game that Sony was hoping would become a quote-unquote Star Wars-like brand for them. Yeah, no pressure there. My point is that while we obviously need live service and AAA titles in gaming, for the health of the industry and for the sake of variety, we need more of these smaller games like Astro Bot as well. I mean, think about it. How often do we get 3D platformers on the scale and with the level of quality of Astro Bot? Every 5 years? That's what needs to change. I hope Sony is taking notes from the success and critical reception of Astro Bot, because it's easily one of the best titles of the year and the kind of game that we desperately need more of. Hopefully Sony finally realizes this and begins allocating more resources to Astro Bot 2 rather than their next multi-million-dollar live service experiment.